Welcome to the LC3 Family Talk podcast, where we take a deeper look at everything from recent sermons to current events, all through a biblical lens. You'll love the guests and stories you'll hear on LC3 Family Talk, where our goal is connection, community, and relationship with God and with one another. And now, here's your host and one of our pastors, David Pritchard.
Hey, well, welcome to LC3 Family Talk. Glad you all are here and have joined us. And as you can see, we have a full table, and I'm really excited about that. I'm really stoked to have this conversation with these brothers, and I think you're going to enjoy the conversation that we're going to have. I think what I'll do, though, is I will let these guys start by introducing themselves and also to tell a little bit about their family and how long they've been here at LC3. We'll start with somebody that a lot of you already know, down on my far right.
Yep, I'm Reese. I'm married to my wife, Allison. We have 2 kids, 3 and almost 2. We've been at Lake City for 5 years now, and I serve as our pastor of Next Gen Discipleship.
Hi, and I'm Lawrence. I've been married to my wife, Ashley, for 8 years. Actually, just celebrated our anniversary last week. And we have 2 kids. We have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old.
My name is Chad Carlson. I've been attending Lake City for about 3 years now. First attended back in 2020, though. Been married for almost 4 years to my wife, Danny, and we have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old boy.
Nice. I'm Logan. I've been attending Lake City for 25 years, and I've been married to my wife for 10. Woohoo! This is our 10 year. And we have 4 kids, 2, 4, 6, and 8.
Nice. So let me set up our conversation a little bit. This really came about because Lawrence did a testimony for one of Pastor Tome's sermons, and it was a testimony on fasting, which we are going to have a conversation about that. In that testimony, there were some pictures. One of the pictures was of his accountability group, which is these guys. And as soon as I saw the picture, I went, oh, I have got to interview those guys and hear more about this. And so that really is why we're here. I think a lot of people know, like, I love football. And so I look at so many things through football, but one of the things I loved about football was just the team aspect, the locker room, the camaraderie, all of that. And so when I see guys doing that, like you guys, I'm always thrilled, but I'm always also asking, I wonder how that came about. So I'd love to just hear, not so much to talk about you guys yet, but more as you were growing up, like what's been your experience with groups or teams or just being together with others? Like what has shaped you guys to get to this point?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I didn't grow up with having multiple people like meeting together like this, especially not in a Christian format. I mean, same, football was the main way of that community, but growing up, especially as I got into my teenage years, Christian community for me took place often in a one-on-one setting, like a mentor role. So this is something for me that is more new, something that I haven't done a lot of, and kind of my background.
I came to the faith later in high school, near the end of my junior year. A lot of my experience was similar through sports and stuff like that. But then going to a Christian college, I think I spent a lot of time building friendships and kind of building foundation. And some of those friends I still talk to today, but I feel like this has been one of the more like consistent groups that I've had, just guys that are just meeting on a regular basis that I've really appreciated.
Sports is a big one for me as well through high school. I think after high school, I got to be a little more intentional. I had a group of guys, we'd meet for coffee once or even twice a week sometimes, early in the morning, just read one chapter of the Bible and kind of go over one thing that stood out to us. And we covered that. And that, I think, showed me for one of the first times, like the value of community and also like the importance of consistency with that, growing closer to the Lord and also one another.
Yeah, I would say the same in college, really. I had just 2 guys that were believers, and we just would meet every morning, and it was great. We just read the Bible or do whatever. I had a lot more time in college, so.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's one of the things that's really key, or it's certainly very interesting about this one, is you guys are all young couples. You've got little kids. I was there once. That is a busy time of life. You guys have clearly had to be pretty intentional to make this work. So I'd love to hear, like, how did it all start? How did this group come to be?
Sure.
I can't remember. I feel like it just has always been. But I think there was a time where, like, me, Lawrence, and Reese, we did the Habits of the Household study, and we started doing small group, and me and Lawrence were in the small group, and Reese was going to join for a little bit. But then that time didn't work for Sundays to meet with our, like, doing or community group, sorry, not small group.
No, it
anymore.
works.
But yeah, so we were doing a community group together, me and Lawrence, and then Reese was going to join us, and then that time didn't work, so we wanted to meet with Reese and hang out with him still, and so we just
Created a time that worked.
picked a different time, yeah, and we all realized we could meet 6 a.m. on Friday, and that time just worked. And then we saw this guy one time.
Yeah, I was a sympathy invite. I think the one thing I'll add to that is oftentimes when I'm coordinating with other men, especially who have kids, as when to meet, it's like another evening commitment is often pretty difficult, especially if it's weekly. But I always joke with people. I'm like, everyone's free at 4 a.m., right? Everyone's like, if you do it early enough, whether it's 8, 7, 6, 5, whatever it needs to be for your work schedules, 6 o'clock works pretty well for us. We're able to meet for an hour and a half or 2 hours.
Even as I'm hearing you guys say that, I'm like remembering how many 6 a.m. meetings I used to have to make stuff like this work. But that is, yes, it's possible, but it's also still a great commitment. So I love that you guys have been doing this. And so how long then has this been going on?
We were just talking about it beforehand because we're like, man, what? When did we even start this? And I think September is when Lawrence, Logan, and I started meeting, and then a couple months later, Chad did get the sympathy invite later on. No, but Chad and I have been meeting one-on-one for a couple of years for accountability. We just felt like even adding to a bigger group would work well, and it really has. So since September, I would say, is kind of when we started.
Great. Yeah. And just in case somebody's missing it, these two are brothers. I know a lot of people know that, but just get that out there.
Connect the dots.
These two are brothers.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. There you go. Well, yeah, we're all brothers. Okay. So I'd love to hear format-wise. What does that look like?
There's not a huge format, to be honest. When we met in September, we started out with doing the Love Dare, and then it's honestly just kind of been organic. What works best? What's next? And so that's been part of our conversation as we've gone through things. And it's been a little bit more structure, I would say, as we've started to go through fasting, and now we're talking about practicing the Sabbath. So we've been going through some of the John Mark Comer practicing the way stuff. So that's been really good. But I feel like a lot of it's just been organic. I don't feel like we necessarily have intentional structure. It was just like we know we wanted to meet and just kind of been going as we went.
You didn't read a book on accountability groups and follow the format that it made out. That's great.
Yeah.
So has there been anything that's been surprising?
Well, and maybe if I could just back up to what you were saying, Lawrence, and even from the beginning, and I think we would all say this, but what really resonated with me early on was, to David's point earlier, we're all in the same stage. And so often in our spiritual journeys, you can get accountability and community from people that aren't in your same season of life, obviously. But there was something to figuring out, dude, how are you disciplining your kids right now? This is not working for me. I yelled at my kids the other day. I need to be held accountable for that. And so often I think our format looks something like, hey, how was your week? And usually it's almost every one of us sharing a way that we fell into sin that week. And it's not on the spot, Lawrence, what was your, sin struggle? But it's pretty open. And that's what I've really enjoyed. I just see parents, we have so many amazing families at Lake City, and there's a little bit of dude, I don't know what I'm doing. Not a little bit of that, a lot of bit of that. And hearing these guys who have kids that are a little older than mine, and they're sharing their struggles really vulnerably, that was just such a safe place for me to share some of my own failures and struggles. So I do think, although it's not a parenting accountability group, because of the season we're all in, that was the thing that sort of rose to the top for us. So.
Yeah. And I would just add, not just the parenting piece, but you're also trying to build a career. You're all young in your career as well. And there's this pressure to do that well. You're talking about do the parenting and the husbanding and all of that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's great. So has there been any surprises or anything that you would say?
I think the level of vulnerability and also just struggle that other men share. I think men in particular tend to put walls up And if you just I walk by Lawrence in church, like we're not going to get into the topics of like, what are we struggling with? Or like, how's your week been? Like, it's more just exchanging, how's it going? But I think when you get to this format and meet consistently, it surprised me how much it's easy for us just to jump right into, hey, here's how I've been struggling, and also just encouraging each other in that. So I would say, especially not knowing these two as much, getting into it, just how quickly we were able to kind of just be vulnerable with one another and skip the small talk, so to speak, and kind of just go right to the point.
I think that like consistency of it is what kind of helps bring that vulnerability, because like the first time you meet, you're just talking about like your week or what's going on and everything like that. And then if you consistently meet, then you have nothing to talk about surface level, so you have to go deeper.
Run out of sports games or whatever things to talk about.
What's interesting to me about that is that generally, as I say, I'm going to be painting with a broad brushstroke. Men tend to be what you just described. We're going to talk about the Seahawks, and we tend to put up a front. We want to put up this face that we're doing great, we're doing all right. And so I think oftentimes I feel like we stop there and say, well, that's just how men are. The thing is, when you do what you guys are talking about and you get below that surface, men are actually hungry for the other. Mm-hmm. Right. We just don't often do what you guys have done, which is why I wanted to meet with you guys, because I have to imagine that there's some people listening that are going, number one, that scares the bejeebers out of me to think about doing what you're doing. But two, I wish I had that. And so that's part of the reason I'm glad that you shared that as something that was surprising. On the two ends, what are some things that you would say, this was really hard about this? And then maybe on the other side, has there been some fruit that you could say, here's something I've gotten out of this?
I would say the hardest part for me was just the time piece. I remember when we first decided to start meeting, Logan was like, I think consistency is so important, just like he said. And I was like, it is. And how about every other week? Yeah. I just don't think I'm going to be able to swing another thing on my schedule. I don't know if I can convince my wife to be the one waking up with the kids at 6 a.m. without her husband. It was certainly a conversation where she had to be all on board with it. So for me, and I think for a lot of us, it's just, what's the value proposition of adding another thing to your schedule? That was really difficult early on. And I think what I've come to realize is like the consistency piece, just like Logan said, is so true, because what I found is in a short amount of time, I felt like I knew these guys more and felt more known than pretty much any other group I've ever been a part of. Mm-hmm. And that was to these guys' own vulnerability and like texting during the day, like, hey man, I'm struggling with lust right now. Like, will you pray for me? And hey, I'm really struggling.
No, wait, who said that?
No, it wasn't me. Yeah.
That was someone else we added.
They kicked him out after they used that word. But just the knowing one another and the honesty that came out. So that would be the fruit to me, is just James 5 says, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. And to your point, that's not easy for men. And yet we're still called to do it.
I mean, waking up, that can still be a battle at times. I'll share last Friday, I woke up just before my alarm at 5:30. And I was like, all right, I'm feeling good. I'm like, good, we meet at 6 and was ready to go. And then I went back to sleep. And then I woke up and it was 6:30. And I had this moment where I was like, I could either go back to sleep or I could go. And I ended up going. And I'm glad I did. It's just even in those moments, and I know we'll get into it later, where there's just been a lot of conversations about discipline and building that consistency. I feel like that's been kind of a theme in our group through like fasting and Sabbath and other things that we talk about. That's probably been the more challenging part, but it's also, I feel like, the benefit of it too, because it's showing all of us like yes, we can all do hard things. Like, we can do these things, and we can only do them really because we're doing it together. Like, there's no way you can grow and be able to do what you need to do and be the husband, be the father, be the man that you need to be without other men. And I know for me, being able to have that support and being able to have these guys with me, and I can call them or reach out, is huge.
It's great. I often say you can grow, but you just can't grow nearly as well. And so I love that. Let me ask this, because Reese brought up the wife thing. If I asked your wives what they think about all this, what do you think they would say?
I think Danny would say that it's a really good place for me to go and just reflect on my week. I think oftentimes, even in our conversations, it's easy to compartmentalize life and not let everything out or kind of process, hey, how did the week go? Where did I fall short? What sin am I struggling with? So I think she would say that it's helped me become more like self-aware, both, of my struggles, but also ways that I've been growing. So I think, she would say it's been a really positive experience and a good, consistent thing I've been having in my life.
You guys all concur with that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's some mornings where my wife is like, oh, do you have to meet? She doesn't say that out loud, of course.
Yes.
But I think by and large, yeah.
Well, so I did reach out and talk to your wives, ask them just their reaction to this. And honestly, they brought me to tears as I read what they wrote. Some common threads where they were all really proud of you guys because they knew, number one, how hard it was to make the commitment, but also just how hard it is to, as men, to be willing to bare your soul with other guys. But they all acknowledge, Reese, what you said, like, yeah, there are times where it's hard, but every one of them said it's so worth it. And so you just need to know that from your wives' standpoint, they're thrilled. And as I was reading their responses, I was thinking, gosh, I wish other young men could hear what these wives had to say. I'd read it, but I couldn't get through reading them. They're really great. Mm-hmm. I would just say, you guys, good job making the commitment, and then good job kind of fighting through that and pushing through that. I'm gonna jump on what Lawrence said earlier. Just this idea, and you brought this out in your fasting testimony, I can do hard things, right? And I think if you ask most guys, can you do hard things? I mean, we'd all say, sure, until we have to do them, and then it's like, oh, maybe not. But I'd love to hear more about the fasting challenge. We don't have to talk a lot about it, but because it was sort of the driver that got us here, I think it would be a shame not to at least bring that up.
Well, I want to, because he might not say it himself, Reese was the one who's been practicing fasting for a long time. Him and Allison have been doing it for a while. And so really he was the one that brought us into it. He's the one that really showed us and talked about it in his experience, and I think has really helped. I'll at least say for me, just hearing his experiences has been really helpful. So, yeah.
For those that have not done fasting, we think of fasting as, you give up some meals, which is great, but give us a little more. What's the point of fasting? Why is it worth doing it?
Well, I would just say, and I'm not an expert, but Jesus had everything in heaven, and he gave up everything to come down to earth, and we have unlimited food, and we could never go hungry if we wanted to. I mean, maybe if you didn't stop working, but for me, I could eat every day of the week and be full all the time, but I choose not to one day of the week because I want to choose to be like Jesus, and I want to choose to not have all of everything and really recognize yourself. I think John Mark Cromer has the 4 things. I don't remember exactly what they all are, but
that's great.
That was the one that stuck out to me as being like Jesus.
Add to that, I think self-control is a big piece of that. In our world, it's just take and do and get whatever you want. And so I think with fasting, it's you're walking into that day knowing I'm purposefully going to resist the flesh in the sense of food satisfies us so much and it comforts us, and we're saying no, not because food is bad, but to take a break from that and to kind of dedicate that time to the Lord. When we feel those hunger pains throughout the day, or the time we would spend prepping or eating, it's a good time just to spend with the Lord and pray and say, my goodness, I am usually full at this time and I'm able to satisfy myself, but right now I'm not, and I'm weak, and I need you, Lord. And I think for me, it's been a big reminder of how much comfort food provides. Yeah. It really does. And if you haven't fasted before, haven't fasted more than maybe one meal, if you've gone a full day, you realize, wow, at the end of the day without eating, you can feel pretty weak, and you almost want simulation or something to excite you, because food can often do that. It can fulfill a lot of your needs. But I think we need to remember that ultimately the Lord is our provider of all things, and he's the one who's going to satisfy, and not food.
Yeah, I love that. And when you think about the Christian walk and the need for self-control in so many areas, anything we can do to strengthen ourselves and in our ability to have self-control, yes, it's in fasting, but it also then carries over into self-control with lust or with anything else that we find ourselves dealing with. That self-control becomes so important. I know when we talk about parenting, it's one of the three most important things. Like we say, we've got to disciple our kids so that they have self-control.
Yeah, I think the thing that was most convicting for me was Allison and I were reading a book back in the summer and just realizing that fasting was one of the key spiritual disciplines for over 1,000 years of church history. And we began reading that Christians up until the 1500s all fasted Wednesdays and Fridays. And now it's like you hear someone's fasting, you're like, oh my gosh, you must be so spiritual for fasting. And it was like, almost back then, it was almost like, are you reading your Bible? Well, of course you're also fasting. It was just so integrated. And I was really convicted just off of the comfort piece. Why do people not fast today? And honestly, I mean, for me, it's just because I'm really comfortable. I like my routine. And so what am I willing to give up on one day a week for the Lord? That was really convicting for me. And Allison was the one that was like, I think we should fast. I wasn't the one. And I was like, babe, I think that's a great idea. I don't really want to do that. And so, yeah, on Fridays, for us, what it looks like, we each usually have a day of the week. Sometimes it's the same day a week that we all fast. And other times for people's schedules, it works for different weeks. But typically what that looks like is eating dinner for us for Allison and I on a Thursday night, and then not eating another meal until dinner on Friday. So it's usually around 24 hours or maybe a little less than 24 hours. And I don't like it. I don't like doing it. I think that might be the misconception is like, it's easy for us for whatever reason, but it's hard. And one day a week, I have to be on my knees to ask Jesus for help because I know I'm not going to get through the day without him because that's how hard it is. And in our comfortable world today, I just think that's a great.
Well, and my goodness, I mean, you pass by food all the time. And like, I know there's times when you're fasting and there's a bowl of chips and you just reach down, you take a bite and it's like, oh, I'm not eating, and because it's so easy to not fast.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, you guys. That's great. You guys know one of my roles at Lake City is community groups. And as I was even thinking about this conversation, I was thinking about somebody might be listening and going, wait, so is this instead of community groups? Is this in addition to? And I guess I would start by saying it's neither of those. Like there's no place for it. There's not a formula for what this is supposed to be, and I'm definitely not asking you guys for that. But I would love to hear you guys just as you think of what we talk about, because we talk a lot about community groups and the need for community. And you guys are doing this thing, call it accountability group or whatever people want to call it. But when you think of it in terms of community groups, where do you see this kind of fitting into the conversation?
Yeah, I would certainly say that it's not a community group for us in terms of how we see it functioning. I know Logan and Lawrence are both a part of another community group with their wives and kids and all that. Alice and I have one on Monday night, and this is sort of like an intentional space, as I see it, for us to be held accountable for things like sin and our goals that we have for our life and spaces that we want to grow in. And sometimes in a community group, there's more scheduled questions or curriculum that you're working through. And so I see accountability as a subset of a community group, not necessarily instead of, because I think it is healthy to have another space with your spouse if possible. I don't think we've talked about that though, in our group, kind of where this falls.
I would say we meet consistently, but our wives don't. But it was when we went to the baseball game, or my wife just had her birthday, and Chad and Danny, Dan and Chatty.
It's Channy.
Oh, Channy. Okay.
Channy makes more sense.
They came, and so it's nice to meet as a group and have a community also, but not necessarily required.
It's informal, but it has brought our spouses together as well.
Yeah, I would say
they're all in mops together, I think. So
yeah, I would say that's probably one of the things that as we build, and we have built relationships with one another, I think that's our goal, would say, is also for our spouses to have that, because I think it's also important, especially in the season of parenthood, not just for dads, but for moms to have that like other support and people and moms to go to and talk about things. And it's going to have that support. And I think that's kind of all of our hope is for our wives to have that, because we know how essential it's been for us to have that too.
Great. Yeah, and thanks, you guys. I bring it up because, there may be somebody listening going, wait, I'm in a community group, so what about this? And I would echo kind of what Reese said. I think there's something about a community group where, especially if you're married, to have something that you go to together and do life together with some other couples or other people. And I think this is different. And so I wanted to point that out in case somebody's wondering that, which, as we try to wrap this up, I would love to hear if you guys have any advice, because maybe there is somebody listening and thinking, yeah, we'd like to do that. Any advice, anything you would suggest if somebody's thinking about maybe doing this?
I would just repeat consistency. The every week thing may sound like a lot, and it might be a lot, and you might have to like really try to get it on the schedule, but every week just kind of makes it like, that way if you do miss a week, you're not missing like a bunch of time. And then again, like I said, with this surface, the first couple weeks might be just all surface information and you guys are just getting to know each other. But then after you get past that, you're talking every week. There's not enough stuff to talk about sometimes, depending on how long you meet for. But.
And everybody's available at 4 a.m. So,
And we've been so flexible. My wife has been working Friday mornings and she leaves the house at 5:30. So the kids are asleep. I can't go somewhere to meet. And these guys have been like, well, let's just go to your house. So it's not like we've been like, oh, if you can't make it at this time at this place. We've all been flexible in seasons too.
Yeah,
so,
I love that. And I'll just say that. I think, honestly, this is a little bit for community groups as well, although I think the bigger the group is, the more parameters you have to put on things to make it work. But I think one of the beauties of what you guys are doing is that flexibility. And I think that's the thing I would say is if you're trying to figure this out, don't just start and be willing to flex as you need to. I think you do have to make some decisions like consistency and, hey, we're going to do this every week at this time. But outside of that, like, what are we going to do? I don't know, but just get the thing started. Mm-hmm. I think the payoff, again, if you read what these guys' wives said, understand like the payoff is huge. Mm-hmm. But you guys have the last say. Anything closing that you guys would want to say just about the journey that you've been on or about this conversation that we've been having?
Yeah, well, this is partially back to your last question, but I would say this group doing something like this should be a non-negotiable for men. I think whether it's one other man or a small group of guys, I think it's easy for a guy to come into a church and fly under the radar and just choose to not be vulnerable with anybody, but you have to be accountable to someone in your life. Someone has to know you other than your spouse. So whether that's one individual who you meet with consistently or a few other men, I would just encourage you to find that, because you can't have your sin hide in the dark. You need to have other men that you can confess those things to and just get encouragement with, and honestly people who can just check up on you and who know your heart and where your heart's at. So that would be my encouragement, is if you don't have something like this, find a way, because it makes all the difference.
And not just, people that love you, right? They're not just checking up on you, but like they love you, mm-hmm. and they're checking up on you.
Yeah. That's what I would add, Dave, is just to the question of what you would encourage people to do. And this might sound narrow-minded, like from a church perspective, but I would say be really selective with the people that are going to speak into your life, because a community group, I don't think necessarily has to be that way. But when you're talking about sharing sin and failures with people, and then these are the guys that are in some way, like some small way, like responsible for my own spiritual health, like I want to make sure that they're really like strongly following Jesus as well, and that we're in a similar stage. Not that you couldn't have somebody a couple years further along in their relationship with Jesus, but I just know man to man here that each of these guys are following Jesus passionately on their own. And so I don't have to walk in guessing, are we really serious about Jesus? I know these guys all are. And for me, that's what's made the difference, is mm-hmm. who these guys are in Christ.
That's really good. Well, you guys, again, thank you so much for being willing to kind of share this. I know you let us peek a little bit behind the curtains, which, isn't always something that you want to do, but I appreciate you guys being willing to do that. And church family, if you're listening and you haven't had a chance to do this, I just encourage you to pray about it and consider doing it, because I love hearing what you guys have been doing. So thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, David.
All right.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for connection, community, and relationship here on LC3 Family Talk. See you next time.